Montana Territory. June 1883, the church bells rang for a wedding that never happened. Francesca Granger stood at the altar in her mother's lace, hands trembling against the bouquet of yellow roses she had picked herself that morning. Her corset dug into her ribs, not from tightness, but from shame because the man who had sworn to love her forever just walked out the front doors of St. Matthew's, boots loud on the wooden floor, muttering something about how she was too fat to fit in his wagon. Gasps followed him. Whispers came next, and then silence. Francesca did not cry. She did not chase after him. She stood still, her chest rising and falling like someone had just knocked the wind out of her. Her father looked away. Her mother's lips pressed into a flat, embarrassed line, but no one came forward. No one said a word. She walked out alone. By the time she reached the edge of town, her dress hem was filthy and her shoes had blistered her feet. She did not care. She kept walking through the sagebrush, past the creek, all the way to her family's empty sheep barn. She sat down in the straw and let the silence wrap around her like a burial shroud. She would not go back. Miles away, Malcolm Jennings swung down from his saddle, brushing the dust from his duster coat. The cattle drive had come early this year, and he was tired of chewing the same jerky, tired of listening to the same men talk about the same women they never meant to marry. He tied up his horse and stepped into the saloon in Elkhorn Ridge, just in time to hear a drunk man chuckle over a whiskey. "Did you hear about that Granger girl in Meadow Creek? Left at the altar this morning. Groom said she was too wide to ride double." "Guess he wanted a wife, not a wagon." Laughter roared. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "Real shame," the man added. "She was real sweet on him. Pretty too if you like him with a bit more meat on the bone." Malcolm turned, slow and steady. "You sayin' she got left for being the wrong size?" The man blinked, confused. "Well, I did not say it like that, but because I reckon," Malcolm said, voice low and sharp, "she sounds like the perfect size for me." The room quieted. Malcolm dropped a coin on the bar and walked out without another word. Francesca slept in the barn that night, curled beside her mother's old quilt, her veil tossed somewhere behind her. She had made peace with the idea that she would not marry. Not now. Not ever. She had loved Peter for 4 years. She had sewn his shirts, fed his father when he fell ill. She had believed he saw her, all of her, and did not care about the extra softness on her hips, or that she could not fit into her cousin's dresses. She had been wrong. The next morning she was hauling water from the well when she heard hooves. She turned, expecting a neighbor. Instead, she saw a tall man on a dark bay horse, a rifle slung across his back, his dark hair tucked under a dusty hat. He dismounted without hurry, his gaze steady. "Miss Granger," he asked, her throat tightened. "Who wants to know?" "Malcolm Jennings," he said, voice deep and calm. "I heard what happened, thought you might need a hand." She narrowed her eyes. "You ride all the way from Elkhorn to pity me?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I came because I do not think you deserved what was done to you, and because I do not think a woman like you ought to sit in a barn crying over a man who could not see straight." Her eyes searched his face. "You do not even know me. I have known men like him. And I can tell you any man who walks away from you is a fool." She looked down at her hands. "Well, you can tell that to my whole town. I reckon I just might." Something in her chest shifted. She did not smile, but she did not turn him away either. 3 days passed. Malcolm stayed out in the pasture, helping her mend fence posts and haul feed for the sheep her father had neglected. He did not push. He did not talk too much. He just worked beside her, steady and solid, until she stopped flinching every time someone said her name. On the 4th morning she found him in the kitchen, frying eggs like he had always belonged there. "You do not have to stay," she said. "I know. I can manage on my own." "I know that too." She crossed her arms. "Why are you here, really?" He set down the spatula and looked at her. "Because when I heard what he said, I got angry, not just for you. For every woman who has been made to believe that softness is shameful, that they have to shrink to be loved. You are not too much, Francesca. Maybe he was just too small." Her throat closed. She turned away before he could see the tears start. "I was going to marry him," she whispered. "I thought I was going to spend my life with him, and now I cannot even walk into town without being a joke." "You are not a joke," he said. "You are strong. You are kind. And you are beautiful." She looked at him again, eyes shining. "You think I am beautiful, I think," he said, stepping closer. "You are the perfect size for me." Her breath caught. He did not touch her. He just stood there, letting her decide. She reached out first, her fingers brushing his sleeve, her eyes wide with something she had not felt in days. Hope. And he smiled, slow and sure and warm as the sun coming out after a storm. They had not kissed yet. But something between them had shifted. Something quiet but strong. And neither of them wanted to look away. The sourdough starter had gone gray around the edges. Francesca scraped it into the slop bucket with a sigh, the smell too sharp to ignore. She'd neglected it for a week, maybe longer, and now it was beyond saving. She rinsed the crock in hot water, sleeves rolled past her elbows, the morning sun warm through the kitchen window. Outside, a magpie hopped across the fence rail, head cocked like it was waiting for something. "I found a rusted scythe behind the smokehouse," Malcolm said, stepping inside. "Blade still good, just needs a whetstone." She looked over her shoulder. "That belonged to my grandfather. My father never took to it." He set it down beside the door, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Mind if I try putting it to use?" "Grass near the creek's near knee-high. No one stopped you yet." Malcolm smiled, but it faded quick. "Saw a man ride past the road an hour back. Slowed when he saw me near the barn, didn't say a word." She dried her hands with the corner of her apron. "Mr. Greeley, I'd guess. He owns the feed store now. He's not fond of anyone who doesn't ask before using his road." He didn't look angry, just longer than he ought to. Francesca turned from the sink. "They're all watching. Every time someone passes, I can feel it. Like I've grown a second head." "I know the kind," Malcolm said quietly. "Men who look without blinking. They don't mean you harm, but they want you to feel it anyway." She stepped back to the counter, sorting through dried beans for stones. "I reckon they'll stop looking eventually. Or they'll get bored." "You don't believe that?" She paused, hands still. "No, I don't." He crossed the room and leaned against the wall near the stove, arms folded. "Then maybe I ought to give them something else to look at." She glanced at him, wary. "What's that mean?" "I was thinking," he said, tone slow and careful. "If I'm staying, I ought to start paying my way proper. Not just chores. I can help with the sheep." "You're coming into lambing soon, aren't you?" She blinked, caught off guard. "You know livestock?" "I helped on a ranch south of Helena for 3 seasons. Cattle mostly, but I know enough to keep a ewe from dying in the night." Francesca set the beans aside. "We lost 4 lambs last spring. My father never noticed until it was too late. I'll sleep in the loft when the time comes. Keep watch through the worst of it. You do that." Her voice was softer than she meant it. He didn't look away. "If you'll let me." There was a silence between them that didn't feel empty. She moved to the back door and opened it, letting in the scent of warmed earth and pine. "There's a shed behind the barn where the birthing pens are kept. Needs cleaning. I can show you." "I'll fetch my gloves," he said. By mid-afternoon, they were ankle-deep in straw and old manure, clearing out cobwebs and hauling away rotted boards. Francesca worked beside him with quiet determination. Her dress caught on a nail and tore, but she didn't curse. She only tied it off with twine and kept going. "You don't complain much," he said as he lifted a wooden slat onto the pile. "No one listens when I do," she replied without heat. "I'm listening." She didn't respond right away. Then, "I used to think that if I stayed quiet, folks would leave me be, but it turns out silence doesn't protect you. It just makes you easier to ignore." Malcolm straightened. "You're not invisible to me." Her eyes met his, direct and clear. "I noticed." The wind shifted, rustling the treetops beyond the ridge. Somewhere a hawk called once and then was gone. They worked until the light turned amber and the air cooled. When they stood back to look at the cleaned-out shed, Francesca wiped her brow and said, "I forgot what it looked like under all that mess." He leaned on the pitchfork. "It looks like something worth saving." She didn't answer, but this time she smiled. That evening they ate on the back porch, not because the house was too warm, but because the sky was clear and the stars came early that time of year. Francesca brought out a plate of cornbread and beans, her hands stained from beet juice, and Malcolm poured water from the tin pitcher she kept near the pump. "You ever marry?" she asked after a long stretch of quiet. "No," he said. "I came close once. She wanted a man who stayed put. I wasn't that man then. And now," he looked at her, the candlelight catching in his eyes, "now I want something solid, something that doesn't blow over when the wind picks up." She tore a piece of cornbread and handed it to him. "I'm not a safe bet, Malcolm. I've got neighbors who whisper and kinfolk who won't speak to me." "I'm not looking for safe," he said, taking the bread. "I'm looking for honest, and you've been nothing but—" She didn't say anything else, but when he reached for her hand, she let him take it. Her fingers were rough from work and his were calloused from rope, but they fit all the same. Above them, the stars blinked on, one by one. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like hiding. A week later, the lambing began. Francesca rose before dawn, lantern swinging low in her hand as she crossed the frost-laced pasture. The sheep huddled near the slope, their breath thick in the cold. Malcolm was already at the small pen behind the shed, kneeling beside a ewe. His coat was damp with dew, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands steady. "She's been pushing an hour," he said without looking up. "I think the lambs turned wrong." Francesca crouched beside him, her skirts gathering dirt, and reached for the ew's flank with practiced calm. "Ease her leg back," she said. "If we can shift the shoulder, it might come right." They worked in silence, save for the low bleats and a single sharp cry when the ewe bore down hard. Together, they eased the lamb free, slick and trembling, its tiny hooves twitching as it hit the straw. Malcolm took his bandana and cleared its nose. "Breathe now," he murmured. "There you go." The lamb gasped, then gave a thin bleat. Francesca sat back on her heels, chest rising with relief. "She's strong. She'll make it." He looked at her, then really looked. Her hair was damp from the mist, her cheeks streaked with dirt, but her eyes held that same clear certainty he'd noticed the day they met. "You know what you're doing," he said. "My uncle raised sheep in the Judith Basin," she replied. "I used to visit summers. He let me help deliver the runts." He nodded, then gently set the lamb beside its mother. "Most men wouldn't let a young woman near the birthing pens. My uncle had one arm and no patience for anyone who thought girls couldn't work." They left the pen together and walked toward the barn, boots squelching in the soft earth. A pair of crows watched from the hayloft roof, motionless. Inside, the warmth of the animals wrapped around them. Francesca drew a blanket around her shoulders and leaned against a beam. "I didn't think I'd keep the sheep," she said. "I figured I'd sell them off before summer." "You still might," Malcolm said. "But it'd be a shame." She looked over at him. "You think I ought to stay here? I think you belong somewhere you don't have to earn your worth every time you walk into a room." Her voice was quiet. "That place doesn't exist." "It could," he said. "Might take time, might take grit." "But it could." She didn't answer right away. The wind outside picked up, brushing leaves against the barn wall. Then, I sometimes think I stopped being lovely to people the moment I stopped being small. He stepped close, careful not to crowd her. You didn't stop. They just forgot how to see. Her eyes met his. And you, I see you fine. That night, she brought out the quilt her grandmother had pieced by hand, and they sat beneath it on the porch while the sheep quieted in the fields. Francesca poured a bit of sorghum over cornbread, and they shared it from the same plate without speaking for a long while. After a while, she said, "Peter used to say he liked it when I was quiet, said it made me easier to handle." Malcolm didn't look over. "I like it when you speak." She glanced at him. "Even when I'm angry, I especially like it then." She gave a small chuckle, then grew serious. "You're not scared off by what folks say, by what they think I am. They don't know you. And I don't scare easy." The moon climbed high and pale, casting silver across the fields. Francesca shifted to face him, one hand resting on the edge of the blanket between them. "Suppose I asked you to stay, not just through lambing, not just for spring. What would you say?" "I'd say I already decided to," Malcolm said. "I've just been waiting for you to ask." She exhaled, slow and deep, and leaned into him, then not in desperation, but in trust. He wrapped an arm around her shoulder, gentle as if she were made of something breakable, though he'd already seen her weather more than most. When she finally kissed him, it wasn't rushed or shy. It was quiet and sure, like the first true thaw after a long winter, and nothing about it felt small. By the middle of April, the wind had shifted. It no longer carried the bite of winter, but something softer, damp earth, wild plum, the promise of planting. Francesca stood at the edge of the pasture, a sack of seed slung over her shoulder, watching the sky for signs of rain. The sheep had scattered among the greening hills, bellies full and coats heavy with spring's growth. Behind her, Malcolm was fitting new hinges onto the tool shed door, the old ones rusted through. She could hear the rhythm of his hammer, steady and unhurried, like a heartbeat she'd come to know even in sleep. "Did you ever have land of your own?" she asked, brushing her palms on her skirt. He didn't stop working. "Once. Quarter section just north of the Musselshell. Dry creek ran through it. I lost it after 2 years. What happened? Railroad came through, paid me near nothing for the rights to pass. Fences got cut, cattle scattered. After that, I didn't see much use in building fences again." She walked toward him, the bag of oat seed shifting against her back. "And now," he looked up at her, then at the half-hung door. "Now I want something that holds." Francesca lowered the sack onto the stoop. "I've been thinking of planting a garden again. I tore out the beds last summer after the lettuce bolted, but the ground's still good. If I get the seeds in this week, we might have squash and beans by July. I can turn the soil for you." She bent to untie the sack. "I'd rather you show me how to fix that plow instead. The blades nicked, and my father never taught me to set the angle right." He set the hammer down and rose, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "You don't mind learning. I mind being helpless." He gave a single nod and followed her to the lean to where the tools were kept. Inside, the plow leaned against the wall, its iron blade dulled to a gray sheen. She crouched beside it, tracing the curve of the metal. "You ever miss living near others?" she asked. "Neighbors right across the road." "I miss hearing someone sing in the evening," he said. "But not much else." "I used to hum when I cooked, then one day I stopped." His voice was quiet. "Because he told you to." She didn't answer, but her hand stilled on the plow. He knelt beside her, lifting the blade to inspect its edge. "First thing is to sharpen it. Then we'll reset the bolt to change the pitch. You'll feel the difference once it's in the soil." She watched his hands move, precise and sure, and something in her eased. That night, she lit the kitchen lantern early and pulled her mother's old recipe book from the shelf above the hearth. She hadn't opened it in over a year. The pages still smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood smoke. She ran her fingers over the margins, where her mother's looping script had added notes in pencil. By the time Malcolm stepped in from the barn, she had flour on her cheek and a pan of biscuits in the oven. He paused in the doorway, the scent of butter and sage drifting toward him. "You cooking for someone special?" he asked. She glanced over her shoulder. "Depends on who's asking." He stepped closer, unbuttoning his cuffs. "I might be partial to someone who makes biscuits like that." "Then you'd better stay partial, because I made enough for two." They ate at the table, the oil lamp flickering between them, casting soft gold across the wooden floor. She poured him coffee from the tin pot and passed him the honey jar, their knees brushing beneath the table. "I heard from the bank clerk in town," she said after a while. "They're willing to extend the loan on the livestock, so long as I can show I've got help with the lambing season." "You do." "I told them that." He looked up, his thumb resting against the rim of his cup. "You planning to stay on this land?" She nodded. "I don't want to leave it behind just because someone else couldn't see its worth." He reached across the table, not to hold her hand, but to rest his fingers lightly against hers. "That's the same reason I stayed." The farmhouse was quiet but not lonely. Outside, the sheep had settled again, their weight pressing gentle hollows into the earth. Francesca stood at the window after he'd gone to bed, watching the last of the oil burn down in the lamp. She didn't hum. She sang. Low and steady, a tune from her childhood, carried soft across the kitchen walls. No one to hush her, no one to laugh, just the sound of her voice and the wind rising faintly through the trees. The last frost came and went on a quiet morning near the end of April. Francesca rose before the sun, as she always did now, and stepped barefoot onto the porch. Her feet brushed the cool wood boards, and she listened. No wind, no sheep in distress, just the hush of a world waiting to bloom. Malcolm was already at the fence line, shirt sleeves rolled, fitting cedar rails into place where the winter storms had torn through. His movements were slow but certain, like someone who had stopped measuring time in hours and started measuring it in seasons. She walked out to him with 2 tin mugs of coffee, the steam curling in the air between them. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "Some," he said, accepting the mug. "Spent most of the night listening to owls. One kept calling from the cottonwood near the pasture. Sounded like it was keeping watch." She sipped her coffee, eyes on the horizon. "I used to be afraid of how quiet it gets here." He drank, then wiped his mouth with the back of his thumb. "You still afraid?" "No," she said. "Now it feels like the land's breathing." They stood there for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching as the sun crested the hills and lit the fields in gold. Later that day, Francesca rode into town with a list folded in her apron pocket. It had been weeks since she last passed through the grove of cottonwoods that marked the edge of Meadow Creek. She kept her chin high, her back straight, and her eyes forward. At the mercantile, she loaded sacks of flour, lye soap, and a spool of blue thread for mending the hem of her only good skirt. She paid in coin, exact change, and nodded politely when Mrs. Yeardley behind the counter asked how the season was treating her. Outside, she paused at the hitch rail, her hands resting on the saddle horn. Across the street, a boy no older than 10 was staring at her. His mother whispered something and pulled him along, but not before Francesca saw the way his gaze lingered on her waist. She mounted up without reacting and rode home slow, letting the weight of the stairs fall behind her like dust. That evening, she found Malcolm in the root cellar, sorting through burlap sacks of last year's potatoes. "I went into town," she said, setting the thread on the table. He stood, brushing dirt from his palms. "Didn't expect you to go alone." "I needed to." She met his eyes. They still look at me like I'm some kind of story they can pass around." He listened, silent. "But I didn't go there for them," she continued. "I went because this is my home, and I'm done shrinking to fit someone else's comfort." He stepped close, his hand gentle on her elbow. "You've never shrunk a day I've known you." She looked up at him, something steady shining behind her eyes. "I want you to stay, Malcolm, not just through spring, not just through summer. I want to build something with you, here, with these sheep and this land and this hard-won quiet." "I came here with nothing but a saddlebag and a rifle," he said, "and I've never had less reason to leave." She leaned forward, forehead resting briefly against his chest. "I don't need a wedding dress. I don't need town bells or yellow roses. I don't need a church to know where I belong," he said. They stood there in the dim cool of the cellar, surrounded by the scent of earth and old root vegetables, and kissed for the second time in their lives. It was slow and certain, like two people who had learned what not to take for granted. In the following weeks, Malcolm built a new pen for the lambs, stronger than the last, using planks from trees they felled together near the creek. Francesca planted beans and squash with calloused hands, her skirts hitched to her knees, laughing when a crow tried to steal her seed packet. One morning, they rode out to the ridge above the pasture, where the wind carried the scent of wild chokecherry. They sat beneath a juniper tree, backs against the trunk, watching their sheep graze below fat, contented, safe. "I want to carve a mark into that beam over the kitchen door," she said, nodding toward the horizon. "Something we made together." He reached for her hand. "Then let's make it last." Years passed and the land held them. The sheep doubled, then tripled. Francesca's garden grew wild and full, and Malcolm's fence never needed mending twice. They built a second room onto the house with windows that faced the morning sun. No one in Meadow Creek whispered anymore if they spoke of Francesca Granger. They did so with respect. On the first day of their 5th summer, he gave her a small carved box made from juniper wood. Inside lay a simple brass ring, its surface warm from his hand. "No preacher," he said. "No crowd. Just us." She slipped it on, her fingers strong and sure. "That's all I ever wanted." They married beneath the cottonwoods, the same way they had lived from the heart, unshaken and true, and the quiet of their home was never empty again.